Hello class, this is the lesson for Tuesday, March 24th. If you look here on the screen, this is your bell ringer or activating activity. If we were in the class, we would share these out, but what I want you to do is take a minute and look at this cartoon character. He's struggling, trying not to drop this tray of dishes, and what I want you to do is imagine what he might be saying right now. As he struggles, what would he think? What would he be saying out loud? What would the dialogue be? And what would those around him be saying? What might his manager be saying? What might the other people sitting at the diner or the restaurant, the people there eating their dinner, what would they say if they saw this happening? So the reason I'm having you imagine this and think about this is because this picture is actually tied to the short story you're going to read today and tomorrow. And when you get to that part of the story, you'll understand why I use this picture. But the focus of today's lesson is on dialogue. So today and tomorrow, as you read the story, this is what you're working with. I can analyze and explain how dialogue reveals complex aspects of a character and propels the plot forward. So we are going to be hyper-focused in this short story on conversation. Okay, so thinking about how we learn about the characters through what they say and how they react to each other, but also thinking about then how do those conversations propel or move the story forward. So we're going to pay attention to what is said and how it is said, right? So to get us started, I have pulled a couple excerpts from the short story you're going to read. These are examples from this story. And if you look here on the board, we have a So if you look here on the board, we have a couple notes before we read this first entry. The first thing I want you to recognize is that this short story has a first-person narrator, and it's written as a diary. So as you read it, you're going to be essentially be reading our characters' diary entries. And so there's going to be straightforward explanation of what happens as well as documented conversations or dialogue. So let's look at this first entry. It says Progress Report 1, March 5th, 1965. Dr. Strauss says I should write down what I think and everything that happens to me from now on. I don't know why he says it's important, so they will see if they will use me. I hope they use me. Miss Kinnian says maybe they can make me smart. I want to be smart. My name is Charlie Gordon. I am 37 years old, and 2 weeks ago was my birthday. I have nothing more to write now, so I will close for today. So this is an entry from Charlie. Here he is narrating this. This is his first entry in the story. So the first thing I want you to think about is, what does Charlie tell us about himself? What's the direct characterization? So Charlie tells us his name. He's Charlie Gordon. He's 37 years old. 2 weeks ago was his birthday. But he also tells us things like he hopes that they use him and that he wants to be smart. So we don't know who they are, but there's some indirect characterization there as well. So the second question would be what does the author show us about Charlie? What are our inferences? What's the indirect characterization? Well, if a character says, I want to be smart, there's the underlying implication that they must not see themselves as intelligent, or maybe other people don't see them as smart. The way he talks about Miss Kinnian and he talks about Mr. Strauss. He comes across as a people pleaser. He wants them to use him in whatever this is going to be. And his language and the way he talks, we can infer that he's kind of childlike. He kind of writes like a little kid. Okay? We get all of this direct and indirect characterization through his narration. So that's the first step to this. The second step to this would be looking at examples of actual dialogue. So this whole page here, you're going to read this page. It's in the short story, and I'm not going to read the whole page, but I want you to notice that there is conversation. Now, when the story first starts, there's not going to be any quotation marks to help us identify dialogue. But what I want to do is read a couple excerpts and pay close attention to what Charlie says and with the man giving him this round of testing, what he says to Charlie, how Charlie reacts, and then how the man reacts to what Charlie says. So how they interact with each other, and think about what that tells us about that man. So if you look over here, it says, I told him I saw an ink blot. Now, if you remember from yesterday's lesson and what you looked at yesterday, this is referring to the Rorschach ink blot test, okay? So this is when Charlie is participating in that. He said, yes, and it made me feel good. Okay, so there again, Charlie tells us that being told yes, that he got something right, it made him feel good. So that builds on our indirect characterization that he's a people pleaser. I thought that was all, but when I got up to go, he stopped me. He said, now sit down, Charlie. We are not through yet. So we notice that the man talking with Charlie or working with Charlie kind of speaks to him like he's a child. Okay, that's a direct response to how Charlie is interacting. So then look over here at this other red box. He was very nice and talked slow like Miss Kinnian does, and he explained it to me that it was a Rorschach. He said that people see things in the ink. I said, show me where. He said, think. I told him, I think a ink blot. But that wasn't right either. He said, what does it remind you? Pretend something. So again, like I said, we have another example where, Charlie makes the analogy or the comparison of this man giving him the test to Miss Kinnian, who was his teacher. So the man is being patient. He's talking to Charlie. He's trying to break it down so he understands. And I want you to think about how the man is being very patient with Charlie. There's some other dialogue in here that I want you, as you read through it, I want you to kind of get a sense for not just this man, but every character that Charlie interacts with that he describes as being part of his life. How do they interact with him, and how do they react to him? And what does that tell us about who they are as people? Okay? Almost to a very basic level of are they good people? Or are they not so good people? So that is the characterization aspect. The next step would be thinking about how these responses influence decisions. How are they going to move the story forward? So right here, we have a test proctor who's interacting with Charlie, who's just not even getting it. He's not understanding what the test is even about. So how might that influence what happens next in the story? And how does the man's reactions to him, how he talks to Charlie, how does that motivate Charlie? What does Charlie do as a response to what people say to him? Okay, so I wanted to talk through this and give you some examples of what you're going to do. Today, your job is to fill out the guided worksheet as you read. You're looking for key lines of dialogue as significant moments that move the story forward. Now, the workshop, the worksheet, not the workshop, excuse me, the worksheet is in Google Classroom. You can type on this one today. I promise you'll be able to enter your answers. You do not have to complete the entire thing today. It is for the whole story. We've broken the story into 2 parts, so when you go into e-class you've gone in e-class for today's lesson. I want you to listen and read along for part 1, and then tomorrow you will return and do part 2 and finish the worksheet. There will not be a video lesson for tomorrow. The exercise for today, the concept and the lesson will be the same tomorrow as it is today. Now, last but not least, I'm going to have a Padlet that you can that you can do an exit ticket on. So instead of doing a sticky out the door, like we have in the past where we put it up on the whiteboard, we're going to do a virtual sticky out the door. So on the Padlet, you're going to put your name on it so I know who did it. And I want you to write down one line of dialogue from a part of the story and explain what that quote reveals about the character. So from any part of the story today that you listen, you're going to pick out a quote, a line of dialogue that stands out to you, and you're going to explain what it tells you or what you can infer about the character that either is being spoken about in the dialogue or about the character that is doing the speaking. So this is today's lesson. Remember, if you have any questions, please reach out to me via email, and I will be doing a live version of this lesson at 1 o'clock if you want to go through it again and be able to ask questions in real time. So there you go.